Welcome back, everybody, to Let's Play Mega Man X2 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Last time we beat up the first two Mavericks, and today we're heading after possibly three more. Starting with the Gator on wheels himself, Wheel Gator. Can you imagine how scary that has to be, actually facing a Gator on wheels? Like, especially IRL, that's gotta be the most frightening thing ever. But, man, you gotta respect this guy's work ethic. Like, ignoring the boss fight because, I've got a bone or two to pick with him for sure on that note. But, ignoring all of that, I gotta respect this guy's work ethic because, like, with most other Mavericks or Robot Masters, like, they all kind of hang out in their own little designated areas. But Wheelgator is just like, nah, son, I'm actually gonna take the destruction to town and actually, like, do the damage myself, riding a giant fucking tank and crushing buildings and shit. And, you're gonna have to come and stop me if you want to keep that from happening. So, yeah, I think that's kind of cool that they actually took the aggressive route for once. But, anywho, with a new X game comes new upgrades, and, this upgrade is quite a bit different from the one we got in X1. In fact, this is probably my favorite X-Buster upgrade in the entire franchise, if I'm being honest, just because of how sheerly awesome it is against boss fights. To the point of where you don't really need to use weaknesses to speed up boss fights with this one. So, the way this works is that you fire off two charge shots. But something that will trip up a lot of newcomers is that you actually have to wait a fair bit after the pink charge comes up before firing off the shot. Otherwise, you get a mid-charge shot in place of a full charge shot, and you certainly wouldn't want that when dealing additional damage to Mavericks. So, just a little heads up in case you guys thought this charge buster or whatever was glitched out. And of course, like the Buster upgrade in X1, this does give us access to a lot of the additional charged weapons for our weapons. That sounded incredibly redundant, but you get the idea. So we'll have a lot of fun messing around with that as the time comes and arises for said special weapons. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and do that now. So, this is oh, Jesus Christ. How I like to do this one is charge up the speed burner and come up here, and that's typically how I get that done. I think you're supposed to use the boots upgrade for that normally, but with a little bit of creativity, there's more than one solution to said earning of said upgrade or whatever. I had to kind of think of how I was responding to that for a second. But this stage is mostly more of an enemy-based stage with a lot of elevation and tricky enemy placement to deal with along the way. I would say out of every stage in X2, this definitely feels the most like an X1 stage proper. So if you're a big fan of X1, this stage is definitely for you. This kind of feels like a proper evolution of a lot of what X1 was going for in regards to enemy placement and stage design. So it's definitely a very fun stage to breeze through once you get the hang of the enemy placement. Running out and about for damn certain. And you might notice that I ended up skipping a door I could have taken earlier, and that is something I kind of want to talk about in regards to this specific Let's Play. Oh, Jesus Christ. I will not be tackling the X-Hunters for the main playthrough. I'll probably cover them in a bonus video, but honestly, I think it's a big waste of time, and I'll go into further detail as to why that is. But first up, we got our Maverick of the Week, or Day, or whichever you may prefer. Wheel Gator is probably my least favorite of the Mavericks to fight. Not necessarily the toughest, but this one definitely feels like the slowest. And if you happen to be going the weakness route and using a said weakness against them, which is the strength chain, this fight is going to take an eternity. Because the problem with that strategy is if you abide by that, every time you hit them with the strike chain, he goes right back underwater and hides out, and you have to do a lot of waiting around for him to actually, do something. This fight, you really gotta plan your movement carefully and pick your shots carefully, because Wheel Gator has this tendency to have annoying iframes once he comes out of the water, and you have to pay attention to that to really know where to land your shots. And you really can't super go out on the full aggressive against him like you normally would with most Mavericks. You kind of need to pick your shots carefully, move around when you need to, and when he does that, always stand close to the ground when he does so, because that's kind of his main deterrent for preventing the player from wall camping too much. And if you happen to get him launched into a part of the wall that's high up, basically the crevices he leaves behind are going to be points in which you take damage from, meaning that it'll kind of limit your ability to run away from him more than usual. So you just kind of have to expect that once he comes out of the water. Try to stay away from him as he's hiding out underwater to make sure he doesn't grab you, because that is definitely his most lethal move. And it's slow, but it's not the worst fight in the world. I just think if you're playing it with the weakness only, then yeah, it's a very boring boss fight. But I'm the kind of guy who gets more enjoyment out of most Mega Man bosses using the Buster anyway, so I'm obviously kind of weird in that regard, But anywho, we got the spin wheel, and the spin wheel is easily my favorite weapon in X2. I'll be showing that off in a bit. And Overdrive Ostrich's stage. Basically, it's a weapon that's kind of slow unless you use it correctly. Basically, how it works is that you summon a wheel, and it slowly goes after an enemy. But what really takes the cake with this weapon is its lingering frames, for sure. Once you place it on an enemy, look at how fast it burns through that enemy's HP. It is absolutely amazing. So, typically the way I like to use it is that I like to summon it in front of me and place it right in front of an enemy, and it burns through way more enemies than you can possibly imagine. And it's very good against mini bosses too. So yeah, favorite weapon in all of X2 without question. But anywho, going back to the topic of the X Hunters, I'm not going to be tackling them because they influence very little in the game, honestly. The only thing they influence is the addition and removal of an extra boss fight in the final stage of the game, and I think it's not even worth it, honestly, because quite frankly, the boss itself isn't even terribly difficult in the first place, and it doesn't even affect the ending either. Like, what the fuck? So I think it's a total waste of time, and on top of that, the bosses themselves are such bullshit. Violent especially. So I'll probably be showing them off in an extra video by the end of this playthrough. But anywho, Overdrive Ostrich's stage gives us access to a new additional vehicle apart from the ride armors, and that is the Ride Chaser. This is probably my least favorite stage in X2, honestly, because most of the stage kind of revolves around the Ride Chaser. I kind of missed that jump, but basically you can actually dash with the Ride Chaser, and you need to do that to make this gap in order to make it to the end of the stage and grab a heart tank, but I've got additional means of getting said heart tank, so don't you worry. Don't you worry about that, my kiddos. And that's literally most of the stage, honestly. I've never been a big fan of Ride Chaser stages, honestly, but out of all of them, I feel like this stage feels the least offensive out of them, because the ones in X4, 5, and 8 are not very good. I love X4 to pieces, but like even I am not a big fan of the Ride Chaser stages and said games. So I'm just glad that it's simply a means to a additional slash but like optional thing rather than being required for most of the stage. So yeah. Anywho, this here is the dash upgrade. Considering that we already have a dash on hand, I think the logical explanation or upgrade to this would be to give us a mid-air dash. And believe me, this is one of the main reasons why I find it hard to come back to X1 sometimes, because, oh boy, the mid-air dash is so damn versatile, especially in boss fights where you need to get from one wall to another. You don't have to worry about, like, landing to the ground. You can simply do this and make it to a wall, no problemo, guaranteed that you don't necessarily dash off of a wall as you're doing so. You kind of just need to do it in midair and not actually dash and jump off the wall at the same time. If that makes any sense, I probably explained that very, very poorly, but nonetheless, so the way I get this normally is by sacrificing a life with the speed burner extension, and that is what she wrote. I didn't even know you could take the Ride Chaser in here for the longest time, so I thought that was something that was mandatory, but nonetheless, that is another means of doing that, provided, you know, your weapons in and out. See, the weapons in X2 aren't bad, they're just misunderstood! Misunderstood, I say! Ah! But in just a moment, we have our next boss fight. And Overdrive Ostrich, I think, is another good candidate to go after first if you're looking for an easy time, just because of how exploitable his AI is. So his battle takes place in a unique field. Essentially, what I like to do personally is scroll him off screen a lot, because this battlefield actually doesn't have walls for you to hang out on. But every time you scroll him off screen, he always runs off into the desert, and you can kind of trigger where he jumps on to, you know, to the ground or whatever, dependent on your positioning. And you can very easily manipulate him this way, provided you know how to manipulate said AI. And because of that, this fight is a lot easier than it has any right to be. The only thing that kind of trips me up is this move. It's very tricky to see where the Sonic Slicers come from, for sure. So you kind of have to be a little bit more reactionary than usual to spot them. Otherwise, you'll get hurt in the process, and you certainly wouldn't want that now, would we? No sirree, Bob. And that was Overdrive Ostrich. Not a terribly difficult boss fight. Very manipulatable indeed. And with that, we get the Sonic Slicer. Not a terribly impressive weapon. I can name a grand total of, like, one time or so in the game where I would actually find use for it, and that's for a mini-boss, basically. But the charge variant of it isn't too bad. It's just kind of slow and unwieldy, and you just have projectiles that function better than it, honestly. Like, I just think it's too awkward to use. It's definitely one of the miss out of the hit or miss weapons in the game for certain. But another thing I want to talk about is that if you're going after the X-Hunters, you definitely want to make sure you do so in a prerequisite, but within a certain period of time. Otherwise, they start vanishing, and you'll, you know, begin to lose access to said X-Hunters. This kind of blows, honestly, because, like, some of the X-Hunters actually require that you have a weapon to reach them in certain stages before you actually, you know, make it over to them. So you can kind of look on the map here and see their locations. So it does kind of force you to break away from your weakness pattern a bit, which is why I think the X-Hunters are very, very flawed. But I think the reward you get from them is so pointless anyway that I don't think they're a total detriment to the game. But they're definitely one of the weakest aspects of X2 for certain. I just kind of wish they would have given the player more incentive to actually go after them. Maybe they could have given us an extra weapon or so. You know? Nothing wrong with that. Anywho, next up is Magnus Centipede. Magnus Centipede has a few extra goodies we can go after. And on top of that, I think Magnus Centipede is actually one of my favorite stages in X2, simply because it takes a concept that is so poorly handled in most games and actually makes a fun, like, kind of platforming stage out of it. So this stage is mostly a stealth-heavy stage. Essentially, you want to stay out of the spotlights to avoid these from, you know, actually activating and becoming a little too overwhelming for our own good. I'm not particularly great at it, but if you can master your movement pretty effectively, you can certainly make your way through this stage without too much trouble, for sure. I think I kind of blew my chances here a little bit because I shouldn't have blown up that enemy to smithereens. So, how many lives do I have? Oh, Jesus Christ almighty. Can I spawn him again? Oh, wow. Those enemies actually don't respawn. So, whoops. Whoopsie daisy. And if you pay attention to the background, this is indeed the X-Hunter's base. It's kind of funny that they just kind of left a Maverick in its place to kind of take care of things while they're gone. Funny how that works. This place happened to be so important on so many occasions, I feel like, throughout the duration of X2 that, like, we'll be visiting this place more than once. Let's just say that. There we go. A little creativity wouldn't hurt us. No, wouldn't it? Woo! A little creativity goes a long ways, my fellas. So come up here properly, and we'll find ourselves a heart tank, and there is another sub-tank for us to find later on in the stage. This next portion kind of trips me up a little bit, I won't lie, because you have to play a combination of both moving out of the way very quickly while also trying to be patient. Otherwise, you'll let these things crush you in the process, or they won't create the bridge you need to move forward. And, admittedly, I think they could have been handled a little bit better, because some of these things kind of appear in a part of the screen where the camera can't really detect them, and as a result, unless you super know their placement very well, they can be kind of difficult to avoid. But a little reaction time certainly wouldn't hurt too much either to have, on the other hand, so yeah. This stage is very much a combination of both going fast and being very slippery and careful as you do so. And speaking of which, oh man, look at those fancy looking graphics, fancy schmancy. So, X3 and X2 kind of use this thing that's sort of kind of like the FX chip used in Star Fox. I don't think it's the same kind of graphical chip, but it's basically something that lets it create 3D looking wireframes such as this. I don't know if there are any other games that use something like this, but honestly, I just think it kind of comes off as dated. I mean, I get it. They're trying to impress the landscape with advanced 3D polygonal graphics. But honestly, this game came out like a year after Star Fox, you know, and just seeing that, you know, head to toe against the two games just makes it look like the odd ugly duckling out of all of them. And now for this section, we must go fast. Stay away from that cursor. That thing is nothing but a foe. Oh, Jesus Christ! And there is a reason for why we must dodge that. Basically, it is used for this little fella here. And the more times you get scanned during that segment, this actually makes the mini-boss a little bit more difficult. And you certainly wouldn't want that. Basically, the more he gets scanned, he gains additional attack patterns. He normally wouldn't fire rising shots like that, but because we got scanned once, that is the result of said trip up. Spin Wheel is just so damn good against all of these mini bosses, though. I highly recommend it for certain if you're wanting to speed run this game. The only sucky thing about the Spin Wheel is that you gotta make sure you make your shots count, because you can only have one spin wheel at a time on screen. And, yeah. Yeah. Panic section. Gotta go fast, but not too fast. Oi. But luckily for us, we have a generous checkpoint. Let's not do that again. Oh my god. Gotta go fast. Gotta go fast! Oh boy. Gotta really pay attention to your surroundings. That, my friends, is like the perfect balance of speed, but careful movement for stage design. You really gotta play your cards right. For damn sure in this level, because it certainly doesn't take any prisoners. And neither does the boss. I think out of every Maverick in the X series, I think Magnus Centipede has to be one of my top 5 favorite fights in the game for sure. Mainly because he has a gimmick that most other bosses have that I've never seen before, and it's pulled off so damn well. And when you get hit by it, you have nothing but yourself to blame for it. So essentially what you want to do is that whenever he starts sucking you in, you need to make sure you try to dash your way away from it. Otherwise, if he grabs a hold of you, you actually take a lot of damage. Not only from your HP, but this actually kind of affects your moveset in a pretty negative way, and you don't want that. Trust me. In fact, we might be using more dash shots for this fight than usual, because he is a very tricky, slippery boss to fight. Oh my god, that was not an interaction I was planning for. Having the mid-air dash boots help for this boss fight for sure, for getting away from him. But essentially, if he grabs a hold of you, you basically lose your ability to charge, and he also makes your movement a lot slower and clunkier too. He actually ends up taking away your dash altogether from doing so. And I don't know why there's never been any other boss fights in the series that have done this. But yeah, as you can see, we can't charge our shots anymore, but we still have access to the dash glitch. And the only logical progression for losing our abilities even more so is to lose our rapid fire. So now I can only fire one limit at a time on screen because of this. And he can also slow down your movement completely too. He can truly fuck you over. And again, you only really have yourself to blame for it. Keep your distance. Don't be afraid to pick and choose your shots. And it should be fine. Like, you can't really go into full-out aggressive on him for sure, because, like, if you do, he punishes you really hard because he's constantly moving around, somewhat akin to Boomerang Kawanger from X1. So, you gotta really find your shots in and place them when you can, meaning the dash glitch is super helpful for that boss fight. Anywho, that's going to be it for part 2. And I will see you guys in part 3, where we take on the remaining Mavericks. I expect this to be a 5-part Let's Play, so, yeah. See you guys then.